welcome to The World Today. I'm Waqas Majeed Khan. Today we're talking about, in fact, Pakistan civil and military officials held a very high-level meeting in which it was decided that cooperation will be extended to Kabul to remove terror support networks in Afghanistan. Pakistan will play its part and try to do its best to help Afghanistan in curbing terror in their country. Apart from that, we're also going to talk about the India-China tensions that are continuing for the past month or so on the borders in Sikkim, and if that is a threat to regional peace, that will also be included in our discussion today. Let's get the conversation started. I'd like to introduce my guests in the studio. Joining me at the moment, we have Qamar Cheema Saab, and let's get the conversation started. Thank you for joining us, Qamar Saab. A very high-level meeting was held, and it was decided that Pakistan will do all it can to support the efforts in Kabul to curb terror in their country. Obviously, we would expect a reciprocal arrangement from the Afghan side so that we also get the kind of cooperation that they're looking for from us. So how do you view this latest development, sir? Because we've also been saying that already Pakistan has flushed out all the terrorists from our territory, but do you think the process is still ongoing?
Well, I think first of all, what needs to be encouraged at the moment is that the Prime Minister took the office and he called the Cabinet Committee on National Security's meeting. I think what is preferred and what would be liked by the Pakistani people and society is that there needs to be an institutionalized decision-making process so that all the stakeholders sitting together can take a very comprehensive decision which will be acceptable to all the stakeholders within the country. And if civil military leadership is sitting together and they're taking a decision, I think that will send a strong signals to our opponents, our adversaries, and our neighboring countries that our democratic path on which we were, that is successful. First of all, that is important. And this meeting is going to be the next week, by the way, to discuss more options.
You mean a follow-up meeting?
Follow-up the meeting. And this is very rare that Cabinet Committee on National Security meets regularly. And this is a very positive signal, first of all. But coming to your point that what we have been seeing in Kabul and what they have been seeing, I just wrote a piece a few days ago on Kabul, and that was on the militarization of diplomacy in Washington and its effect for Afghanistan and Pakistan. What we see is that, and what I see as that, as a student of international politics, since last 7 months, since President Trump took the office, since January 20th, there has not been a policy for Afghanistan and Pakistan. I find the most confused administration in Washington, D.C. Since this war in terror started. United States has spent some $76 billion for Afghanistan for the military buildup, but unfortunately the result is that the confusion we have since last 7 months, one thing. Second, the President Trump is giving all the charges, all the powers to his generals to decide whatever you have to decide for Kabul. I think at this moment, what President Trump is doing, he's negating and he's castigating President Obama's policy where he took back all the soldiers from Afghanistan and said that we are done with what we have to do. We build the institutions, we raise the military, we have strengthened institutions, we brought the unity government, now it's your turn. So Trump is bringing the soldiers back in Afghanistan, giving all the powers to the generals to take a decision for Kabul, and then private contractors are coming. And that is where the things are important. For example, Jared Kushner, president's son-in-law, is thinking to have private military contractors instead of the regular army in Afghanistan, so that if a military soldier dies, that brings sometimes tough time for the government to defend that you are killing, you're taking your sons to the other country and you're getting them killed there. So what matters at the moment is that there needs to be a more diplomatic process that needs to be started. What we have in Kabul, or what we have seen in Kabul, is that Pakistan is doing wonderful on its side. We have done with the Raddul Fasad. We are doing with the Raddul Fasad. We have done with the Operation Zarb Azab and many other operations we have done.
Khyber 4.
Khyber 4 we have started. And at this moment, with the American generals who are coming time and again, and they're talking that the Pakistan is doing a great work at this moment. So in this position, what we want in Afghanistan is the more role of the diplomatic corps of United States and Kabul. We want more diplomacy in Afghanistan. We want the stakeholders within the process needs to be involved, needs to be taken into the setup so that those who are out of the process, they could be given power share. And for this, I think the Taliban, who are controlling some 40% of the territory in Afghanistan, I think they are one of the largest stakeholder in the process. And Americans have just made the Afghan government confused, because the Kabul-Washington Treaty Agreement of 2014 does not say that United States will help Afghan government when there will be an attack by Taliban on Afghan government. So the security agreement is vague, it's opaque, it's not clear, because majority of the threats that are coming, they're coming from Taliban. But the Americans are fighting with IS there. Although IS is a threat, there's no doubt on it, but they have to fight with the Taliban. But the security agreement say, you have to deal with the Taliban, we can't fight. And the result is, only this year 5% territory gone to Taliban, so that makes some 40% territory. So I think what matters at this moment and what is needed at this moment is that the diplomatic toolbox need to be used in Afghanistan. Until and unless you do not use your diplomatic skills in Afghanistan and you do not bring all the stakeholders other than what we have in the setup on the table, you have to negotiate, you need to give them the share of the power. That is where things could be, we can see that things could be fine. Otherwise, what we see is that if more role is to generals in Afghanistan, if God forbid this policy fails, it means this Foreigh is gone, where 7 years has passed, there is no Afghanistan's policy from Washington. This 4 years will be definitely lost, and next 4 or 5 years, a new president, or if the president continues, so it means there are next 7-8 years we find a confusion in Afghanistan, and there is a confusion in Afghanistan. And I think after 16 years of fight, they need to understand that we need to have a more political role. Enough is with the fighting. You cannot fight with the people who belong to the fabric of the nation. We may disagree with them. It's not Pakistan who can just flush out anyone from the country who does not agree with the constitution and with the state. Pakistan has done a great. Those who didn't agree with us, those who didn't follow the Pakistan's constitution, law of the land, we just gave them a very strong message. Your place is not in this country. And one more thing, we have been seeing that there are parties who had been radical in the past. They're also joining, they're more political in nature now, and they have made political parties. Although we have seen Irish Republic Army got political, and they were radicalized, but later on they turned. We have the examples, and I think this is where we call that Pakistan's constitution, supremacy of constitution is there, and the institutions are stronger, democracy is stronger, and we have told the world, and now the job is for Afghanistan to have more political role there. That is needed. Otherwise, it will be chaos, it will be a mess, and we will not be in a position to deal the mess in Afghanistan. That's not our jurisdiction.
Absolutely. We've also been joined by Rana Saab. Rana Saab, how are you, sir?
I'm fine.
Okay, so we're talking about the meeting, the high-level meeting that was conducted between the civil and military officials, and they decided to extend the cooperation to Kabul to flush out any kind of militants that might be found on this side of the border and try to help them secure peace across the border. So how do you view this latest development, this meeting of the National Security Council taking place, and the government seems to be quite serious about pursuing this line?
I think it is very important. The meeting is taking place at a time when just after 24 hours there's going to be another meeting in Washington, which President Donald Trump is going to chair, and he's going to get a feedback from his officials and the policymakers in what manner they can resolve this ongoing problems, insurgency in Afghanistan. I think Pakistan obviously is looking at both the pros and cons of the policy that we know is what is likely to be, because it seems that perhaps in one way or the other, Americans have been rehashing their previous policy. They are not going to come up with any hard options as we heard in the past. I think again carrot and stick policy is going to be followed, and probably this time around the pressure would be on Pakistan that if Pakistan says that they are coming down hard on militants operating from this side of the border, so what is a verifying mechanism? I think their concentration and focus is going to be on that particular point, and that is where I think, though I believe Pakistan in the past did have that kind of mechanism where Americans, particularly during General Musharraf's regime, Americans were allowed to oversee the operations conducted against the terrorists. But now the situation is different. We are living under democracy in a country where the rule of law has begun to prevail. I think Pakistan should not compromise over its sovereignty. Pakistan has done sufficiently on how to handle these militants. We cannot make distinction between militants operating on Afghanistani side of the border, on this side of the border, because our job of our military has been, and they have done it, I would say, tremendously, by flushing out all these militants from Pakistani side of the border. Obviously, this is a 2,600 kilometer long, porous, zigzag border, and it becomes very difficult to make distinction which part belongs to Pakistan and which part belongs to Afghanistan. In that kind of environment and situation, Pakistan has killed a large number of militants, and obviously they sneaked into Afghanistan. We can't stop them. Now, it's a policy paradox that we have seen from the Afghan side. On one side, they want Pakistan to come down or hard on the militants, and when Pakistan launches operation, and they blame Pakistan that as if we are sending them through operation to Afghanistan. No, it is none of Pakistan's job. We have to conduct operation, which we have conducted. We have flushed out these terrorists. Those who could have been killed, Pakistan has killed them, and those who have fled, they have fled because it's a porous border, and Afghanistan government doesn't want a border with Pakistan. I mean, they don't want Pakistan to have fencing. No, what Pakistan should do. It's all propaganda warfare that the government in Kabul has launched over the period of time. And they are blaming as if entire insurgency is being remotely controlled from Pakistani side of the border. There is a very small component of it. Very small component of it. Maybe you call it 10%, which is humanly not possible to stop the infiltration of Afghan Taliban or other militants groups from other side of the border, because you cannot basically provide fence the entire border, and humanly it is not possible. That is something which needs to be understood now by the
Rana, we'll come back to that. Right now we've been joined by Rahim Mullah Yusufzai Saab on the telephone line. Thank you for joining us, sir. Sir, in your opinion, do you think that the meeting that has been held, the security meeting attended by high-ranking officials both from the civil and military government is going to be a step forward or a good step in order to address the concerns of Kabul when it comes to militancy?
I think that this meeting was important because we have a new Prime Minister and we have a new Defense Minister. And then, this is an ongoing issue, so this, has to be discussed. And also the relations with Afghanistan, that they need a constant, attention. So, I think on its part, Pakistan has to do things, even if there is no cooperation from Afghanistan. We should not be expecting too much from Kabul, if you look at the record. So, Pakistan has been doing border management on its own. There has been no support from the Afghan side. They have managed to do a lot. And I think that if there is cooperation from Afghanistan, that will benefit both countries. But if they are not forthcoming, then Pakistan should go ahead with whatever plans they have to secure the border and to also strengthen Pakistan's defenses.
Right, sir. One of the other things that was reaffirmed in that meeting was about, or rather resolved in that meeting, was to work at all levels with the government of Afghanistan for the removal of all irritants, including repeated cross-border fire and support networks in Afghanistan for terrorist incidents in Pakistan. So do you think that that is also going to materialize anytime soon?
This is a reiteration of earlier commitments by Pakistan, that they want to resolve all the issues with Afghanistan, and that will require a dialogue and, some improvement in the trust with each other. So I think that, Pakistan should continue to find ways and means to engage the Afghan government. And I know there have also been certain, secret contacts between the two sides. But those also, have created some promise. Also on the economic front, there has been some improvement in the relations, and there will be more meetings because, if there is better trade, more trade, I think that will benefit both sides. and that can create space for political dialogue and also raise the hopes on both sides, because the trade relations actually also are suffering because of the strained relationship. So the trade between the two countries was $2.4 billion until 2-3 years ago. Now it is only $1.2 billion, and Pakistan actually has suffered more because of the drop in the trade, because Pakistan, the trade is in Pakistan's favor. So there are ways and means, there are, avenues which can be explored to try to improve the relationship.
Yes, sir. One of the main problems has always been the lack of trust between both Kabul and Islamabad. But do you think that this meeting would address that mistrust that exists between both countries, and that can also be eliminated and both countries can move on a cooperative path?
I think it won't be easy. The lack of trust is a very important and very, issue. So it will happen, I think, step by step. If they are able to do one or two things together and overcome, some of the problems, then there will be an improvement in the trust. These confidence-building measures are required, and that will happen if there are more visits, more meetings, and at the highest level. It is time that,
All right, thank you very much, Rahimullah Yusufzai Saab, for taking out the time and talking to the world today, bringing the conversation back to the studio. Cheema Saab, you heard what Rahimullah Yusufzai Saab said also. The fact that the mistrust that has existed between Kabul and Islamabad, that is the main issue. And do you think that that has been taken into account when these high-level meetings are being conducted by the civil and military officials, that basically the mistrust needs to be addressed and removed? So do you think that will have any good positive effects?
Well, I think definitely it has been one of the topic that has been always in the high-level meetings. But unfortunately, in my personal understanding and capacity, what I have been able to understand between Afghanistan and Pakistan, Afghanistan does not want to understand this, want to bridge this gap. Why? Why they don't want to bridge the gap? Unfortunately, the Afghan government does not have the capability to bring order at their own place they are controlling. So if I am not able to control the territory where I am, having a hold, then who should I blame on? If the people will ask me, the international community will ask me that you are not capable of that. So if I am not capable of that, whom should I blame? I can't blame the NATO. I can't blame the other ISAF. They have left. There are very few people who are living there, some 13,000, in the Resolute Support Mission. They are nothing. Right. They are here to defend themselves. So who they have to blame? So the only country that is left and has a borders and is the largest stakeholder with Afghanistan is Pakistan.
And the scapegoat.
And the scapegoat. So who, and this is what the Americans have been talking. Time and again we get questions and we are asked by the international media and other people that,
well, I'm glad you raised the American issue, and I want to bring that question to Rana Saab. Rana Saab, you were also talking about the meeting that is supposed to take place in Washington. But something very disturbing and sad has occurred. They have declared Hizbul Mujahideen a terrorist organization. Before that, they had declared their leader a terrorist. But you see that the problem is that when the US takes such unilateral actions of declaring the indigenous and true movement for liberation of Kashmir as terrorists, then they start joining in the cacophony or the narrative of the Indians, when it is clearly the Indians that are the oppressors and the ones who are committing the most gross human rights violations on the poor, hapless Kashmiris. And here we have a situation where the Americans are turning around and calling the Kashmiris terrorists. How do you justify that, sir?
You see, the problem with the Americans has always been in the Middle East and also in this part of the world, that they lack the true understanding of
but
the
don't
region.
You think that's blatant hypocrisy if you see what's happening in the US right now?
It is more than hypocrisy. You see, now the deads in Kashmir, in held Kashmir, are being buried in Pakistani flags. And you would find Pakistani flags being hoisted there. And then people in every next streets, there are hideouts of the militants, because they believe that they are not terrorists, they are freedom fighters. They have huge support, these militant groups. And now, since the kind of the environment that has unfolded after 9/11, India is having a single track one policy to bracket the struggle of Kashmir with terrorism and then pressurize Pakistan to abandon its diplomatic and moral support. And then they would blame Pakistan for all the mess that has been in Kashmir or for all the mess that has been in India. I mean, they're so big conspiracy theorists. And I think there is a greater realization within Pakistan's security establishment that Pakistan's alliance with America is more tactical. It's not geostrategic, though we have it on the paper. And it is just designed in one way or the other to use Pakistan in a manner to bring Afghan Taliban on the negotiating table. And I think we are here not fool. I mean,
but Rana Sahib, it's really strange. You know, on the one side, you have a general from the US Army praising Pakistan and saying that they are our partners, they are our allies, we need their support for peace in the region. And then they go ahead and they do something like that. And they actively damage the Kashmiris' cause for liberation and freedom. And they actually go against everything that they stand for or what they claim to stand for.
All that glitter is not gold.
Right.
Because behind these exchange of pleasantries and then the words of expressions of goodwill gestures between two countries, there is a real war between the US and the Americans. And that is being fought in the entire region in the sense that both countries are watching their geostrategic interest in their own manner. Now, if the no bigger trouble is that Americans consider and then they have propagated as if Talibans are being operated from Pakistani side of the border. This is a huge, huge exaggeration. As I earlier on pointed out, the component of insurgency from Pakistani side of the border is hardly 10%. Now it is the Iranians, these are the Russians who are providing Afghan Taliban weapons for their own geostrategic interest. Iran doesn't want Daesh to have its foothold on Afghanistan. Reason being is that Daesh has been killing Shias inside Afghanistan, and they want to use Afghanistan as a base camp to launch terror attack on Iran. So Iran basically is left with no option but to support Afghan Taliban. Iran knows, like anybody else, that the rate of the government of Kabul is just restricted to the capital and some highways. The entire area, other areas, officially American admit that the 40% territory is held by Afghan Taliban, but my understanding is that the actual territory that Afghan Talibans are holding, that is between 60 to 70%. So in that kind of situation, obviously the regional powers have to negotiate with Afghan Taliban. They are the de facto alternative government, and China has to negotiate with them.
Rather a parallel government.
They are parallel government. China has to negotiate with them. They have their diplomatic office in Qatar. And then Iranians, have been providing them shelter. You remember the Afghan Taliban chief, Mullah Mansour, was killed on his way back, coming from Iran and entering in Pakistan. That actually reflects how Iran has been supporting them. Now, trouble here is that the entire blame has been placed on Pakistan for all the mess that Afghan government has been in. Afghan government is thoroughly corrupt. Americans have spent more than $115 billion on the reconstruction of Afghanistan. Out of this money, more than $70 billion has been spent on the Afghan National Army. And you know what is happening? Every year, 50,000 of members of the Afghan National Army, they desert, which means the 20% of the entire army. And then the biggest threat that is against Americans is not from after Afghan Taliban. It is not from anywhere else. That is from Afghan soldiers who have been attacking Americans, who have been attacking NATO forces. So in a broader picture, now there was a lot of reviews, and there were a lot of policy options for the Americans. And at the end of the day, they are going to rephrase their policy. There will be pressure on Pakistan to do more. And then they will be very polite with the Russians. And they will ask them, come over, let's negotiate. You would be also on the negotiating table. But the Russians have already hijacked the entire peace process. They are now leading this entire peace process. Iranians, They are simply not ready to talk with the Americans. So at the end of the day, it is a Pakistan upon whom traditionally they've been putting pressure. And I think this is the high time Pakistan needs to be in a defiant mode. Let Americans know that we are a sovereign state. This is not a regime under General Musharraf where everything was being done just at the flick of your fingers. It's a situation has changed altogether. And I think Americans are coming to a point where they will have to negotiate with the Afghan Taliban. They have been a little soft. They are saying Afghan Talibans are the reality in Afghan society, but we don't want Daesh foothold.
They're not even calling the Afghan Taliban a terrorist organization, by the way.
They are not calling because they know
that is
have
the
to
interesting
negotiate.
part. Now, you have the Afghan Taliban that are killing US soldiers in Afghanistan, but they are not terrorists. But the Kashmiri freedom fighters, Hizbul Mujahideen,
are terrorists.
So how do you
Indians,
deal with
Indians
that?
using their espionage network inside Afghanistan,
Again, is not terrorism.
they are not terrorists. You see, there are hard geostrategic games.
This hypocrisy has to be confronted by Pakistan.
I think this has to be confronted in a manner that is now more visible, because this is the high time that the Pakistani government, the military, they need to let the people know that we are a respectable nation. Gone are the days when we used to provide intelligence to the Americans to conduct these drone attacks on our own territory in breach of our own sovereignty. That secret understanding and all kind of arrangement that were put in place in the past, that should be all over now. We need to behave, and we in a manner to tell government in Kabul, you don't have your right beyond Kabul. And by the way, this was admitted by the Afghan ambassador to Islamabad that we don't have raid in the eastern and in the southern areas, which is bordering with Afghanistan.
I think there needs to be some introspection by the Afghans, and they should stop putting all the blame on Pakistan for their own mess.
They would not do it. They would not do it because there are two heads of the government. They have been fighting with each other. And many times, one of them would provide intelligence to Taliban, and then they would capture many districts. So they themselves are one of the leading source of insurgency. Most of the time they think about whose powers has more power and in what manner they can basically defeat the other component of the state machinery. So when there is so much things are going wrong within the ranks and files of Afghan government, they don't have a policy, and because of which I think part of the reason is that Afghan Taliban have been attacking the Afghan National Security Forces, and they have their own reasons to attack them. They have their own religious agenda. We may agree or disagree, but the Afghan Talibans are a reality inside Afghanistan. The world is negotiating with them, and we should not come down hard on them in a manner that if Americans want us to go inside on the Afghan side territory to crack down on Afghan Taliban, we should not go for that option, because we have whatever we could have done, we have already done it. I think our job is by and large is over. We have conducted operation on Pakistani side of the territory. Now it is the job of Americans and the
Cheema Saab, you agree with Rana Saab's contentions?
Yes, definitely. I think we have done a great job. The world is realizing it, although reluctantly realizing, but they're realizing. And every time, even today, the American delegation is here. The CENTCOM generals are here, and they have accepted Pakistan has done a good job. But I think they are like, even today they are talking that if Pakistan is having some good Taliban in Afghanistan or not, or how come Pakistan can lose those Taliban or something like that. They just talk on that, and this is the Afghan narrative, this is the American narrative. But Pakistan has been talking. I think I found a very difficult position for Pakistan as well.
I think the government in Kabul, or rather the Afghans, need to realize that Pakistan is really their friend and wants the best for them, because it is in Pakistan's own national interest to have a peaceful and stable Afghanistan, have a Afghan-owned and Afghan-led reconciliation process that we have always supported, and we still support that. Well, we'll leave it at that for the moment, because this is going to be an ongoing debate, and we'll talk about it in our subsequent shows. But let's move on to our next topic, and that is the standoff that's going on between India and China on the borders. Now, the latest escalation is that the armies are now throwing stones at each other. So how long or how much of a difference or distance is there between throwing stones and then just picking up a gun? Cheema Saab, what's your opinion? Do you think that the things are going to get bad from bad to worse, or do you think that there might be some sanity being demonstrated by both Beijing and New Delhi?
I think the sanity will prevail because both the countries understand that they have a huge investment and they're really the business partners. I remember the former chairman, Premier Lee of China, when New Delhi, and he said that the elephant and the dragon have learned to dance together. Now we are not in that position. So I think there are certain sentiments on both sides. There are certain ideological sentiments on both sides. Indians somehow realize China is our rival, and they find proud to call China our rival, and it gives them huge pride because that makes them an equal and competent partner in Indian Ocean and in the Pacific and all that. So what I find is that they like to do it. The Chinese don't want to give an impression. Personally, in my understanding, they don't want to give an impression India is our rival because they do not compete with India the way the Chinese have increased their power apparatus globally. They have
They think the US is their rival.
The US, and they have their own presence in Africa, the military bases in Africa, and they are the basically Pacific and now Atlantic power, and they have footprints around the world. So they don't want to engage with a neighbor which they call a troubled neighbor. So they just want and the Chinese. I think the good side of the Chinese is that they always look everyone from a customer's perspective. That how it can be a customer. And I think the bilateral trade between China and India has crossed $100 billion almost. And I think they were not, you cannot prefer friends over customers. Customers are more important than friends. And I think they are very important. But the Indian side, I have been monitoring Indian media and we have been looking at that. They feel it more energetic and they want just to getting involved with China, but the Chinese are smart. They know that we always have a trouble. They have a Dalai Lama there, and they don't want to just give air to certain issues, but Indians are there. But I think there won't be anything bad where that would be uncontrollable.
But you see, the situation is quite tense on the border in Sikkim, especially when we talk about the area of the Chicken's Neck. Rana Saab, in your opinion, what about Bhutan's position? Because the actual problem is between China and Bhutan. The Indians have come to the rescue as the superheroes to save the lives of the innocent Bhutanese in this particular case. How do you think it's going to play out?
I think Bhutan feels being sandwiched between two neighbors, and they are having a little more cautious role. They don't want to project themselves to be siding with any particular party, but at the same time they have to do it. But I think, as my colleague has pointed out, sooner or later there is going to be management of this entire issue, because China doesn't want to open up another front. And China's entire focus has been on an economy. It has huge investment on Pakistani side of the border, though India has been pointing out our Gilgit side that it is a disputed territory, you can't do it. But China again has been managing it. And by the way, very, very important part of that, I want to bring your attention, the Chinese and Indian involvement again on our Kashmiri side of the issue, because Gilgit is one way or the other is also linked with that. Right. And the reason India pointed out and said that the China cannot pass through its roads and entire infrastructure through a disputed territory, that is very, very important. And Chinese, in a broader picture, now there has been also behind the scene talks with Pakistan that in one way or the other, Pakistan needs to do something where the disputed nature of the territory can be faded out, because they don't want that at one point of time things turned against them, though I don't foresee that happening. So I think in a broader picture, Indians basically, they are trying to, as my colleague pointed out, project themselves that their real rival is China. But behind the scene, their entire focus is on to Pakistan.
Obviously.
Because we had ideological clashes. Their entire military strategy is directed at Pakistan. On one way, they've been sponsoring insurgency inside Afghanistan through inside Pakistan through Afghanistan, and then militarily, their preparations, particularly on the Kashmir side of the border, is more Pakistan specific. And if you look at Indians media, they are far more harsh, far more aggressive when it comes to Pakistan. and as compared with China, they are not as much harsh. So I think, again, what I said, that all that glitter is not gold. Sooner or later, I think China is going to handle this issue. China simply, the fact that the soldiers are throwing stones at each other, and they had physical clashes, not using guns, that reflects that the both sides don't want any clash, because this is going to send a signal to their economy in a very negative manner. They would not get themselves engaged, but at the same time, in one way or the other, they want to maintain their status quo.
Well, there's also the issue of the moral grandstanding that is taking place on the issue of the chicken's neck and that road that China wants to build towards Bhutan, and the Indians are now trying to prevent that from happening. But do you think that the Chinese will be able to have their way and construct the road that they want to construct? Cheema sir, what's your opinion?
Well, I think the Chinese are more powerful in its capability to implement their decisions, whatever the case is. But I think they don't want to be that at any cost. That is what they will try to keep in mind, that this is what their primary goal is. Because as I mentioned earlier, they don't want to make India a hero globally in any way, or if there is any casualty or the Chinese somewhere find that they have not been able to implement.
This particular standoff between India and China is not really a threat to the regional peace?
No, not at all. In my understanding, not at all. But if it prolongs, and I think one more thing is that the Indian-American military agreement, I think that will give a more boost, or that will enhance that has enhanced India's confidence. One, the Americans will be looking at it very carefully, that how far India is powerful, capable enough if we have that military pact with the India, and to look at the Indian Ocean or the further seas or into the Asia Pacific, how much India is powerful. And I think just to raise their profile in front of the United States, it's a good stunt as well, just to jump into things and to give a message to their partners. But they know that with China, they cannot compete. The military is not capable, as Rana was mentioning. They're all preparations for a military fight with Pakistan. They don't have that military presence with China. You know, if you have to have, if you feel a threat from somewhere, you need to deploy your assets there, so that the world can actually understand we are feeling a threat from this particular place. But in case of China, they just use it as a leverage for gaining power or gaining this status worldwide, because when it draws headlines around the globe in international media that India and China are at standoff, I think that brings respect if your rival is powerful and it's strong. And the way the world is looking at India and its profile, so it will be like, this is the country that is rival to China, and look, I think if China is rising, we need to invest there, we need to push there. So I think the Chinese...
It's another smart marketing strategy
for them,
and that's
to,
all it is.
for international
Rana, what's your opinion?
I think this entire China's and India's so-called border conflict is also bringing China and Pakistan very close. And then India is also exploiting this border tension with Americans in a manner that, as my colleague pointed out,
trying to show them that look how great we are.
How great we are. We have taken on the China, something
right.
You have not been able to do it. We are doing it. But,
on your behalf.
But in the entire process, they are getting concessions from Americans against Pakistan.
Right.
What we have seen now, Hizbul Mujahideen being
Absolutely.
declared as terrorist, and the entire Kashmiri indigenous struggle is being bracketed with the terrorism. They are gaining concessions over there. China is not an immediate threat, not a threat in the short term, maybe in the long run. But in the short term, they are gaining all concessions against Pakistan. And now you won't find Americans to talk about Indian presence inside Afghanistan, their terrorist network, their espionage network. And all Indians have been saying against Pakistan in one way or the other, step by step.
Is being lapped up.
And then Americans are accepting all those demands.
Right.
And I think China has also realized that in the long run, Pakistan is going to stay their partner. And their relationship, their economic relationship with India, and that is more like managing their economy. China has already opened up front on the southeast sea borders, and I think on this border again, the situation sooner or later is going to be calm.
All right. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for taking out the time and being on the show. Well, you heard the conversation, and in conclusion, we'd like to say that the only way forward for this entire region to progress is that if all the countries work together and cooperate with each other and stop warmongering. With that hope and on that note, it's goodbye.